Welcome to Rune Soup, a podcast about magic, culture, and the paranormal, coming to you from... My name is Gordon, and I shall be your host. Enjoy. Today on Rune Soup, all the way from the land of smiles, we welcome Peter Jenks, or just Jenks. Peter is the author of the recently published The Thai Occult, and so we shall inevitably be speaking about the fascinating subject of Thai animism and magic. Jenks, welcome aboard.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
Oh, good indeed. No, I'm very much looking forward to it. And given the book that you have recently put out, I'm rather interested in the traditional question number one. Jenks, were you a weird kid?
Yeah. I think my first sex was with a ghost.
Nice.
That's a good start to an interview, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think actually that's more common than what people realise. And I've always been close to ghosts, always seen ghosts, always kind of lived with them and just got used to their presence. And then wherever you go, you end up in the same vein in whatever country that you're living in.
Do you know, when you say your first sex was with a ghost, I have a similar story of incubus, succubus, kind of nightmare sex experience that wasn't necessarily all that bad at a sort of puberty, onset of puberty age myself. So I wonder if I technically fall into that category as well now that you mention it.
Well, I think it's a lot more common than what we realise, whereby we have wet dreams, and I think it's a lot to do with the ghosts coming into us and enjoying us while we're at our sexual transition.
And so that was one of your, presumably this is when you're talking about it at a similar sort of early adolescent age. Was that your first experience with weird, or did you grow up in a haunted house or so on?
No, actually, no, that house wasn't haunted, which I think nearly every other one has been. But it was just in the country, and I was very aware of the spirit of nature and the closeness of things around us when you can keep out the modern world. And
Jenks, that's not a very strong Thai accent you have there. So where was this house?
It's Manchester, unfortunately. Well,
Yes.
It's actually just north of Manchester in England. I've been living in Thailand now since 2002.
Brilliant.
My accent's probably improved because people do have to understand you.
Yeah, good point. Good point. I find that having worked for a German company in the UK and doing a lot of business in Europe, you do develop like an international English accent because
Yes.
wherever you're from, your Mancunian accent, Australian accent, whatever it happens to be, they used to kind of international language school English, which I never went to because I grew up thinking I knew the language. Turns out I did not.
I think it's all a learning process. I think learning another language actually improves our own language, and really, the aim of language is to communicate. So, when we're with people who are not as adept as English as we are, and the English language is phenomenally difficult. We have to make allowances, and knowing people is about being understood and getting on, isn't it?
That is definitely true. Speaking of getting on, then, so tell us, other than the ghost sex, give us some other ghost stories from the childhood to paint the picture of you as a weird kid as we carry on with the biography.
It was more, it takes a realization for these things to come through. And it was more about, there's been a strain in my life whereby I've always known witches. And there's always been a drift towards that, even before I could name it. Yeah, and it's only really in retrospect, because this is, the 60s and early 70s. It's predominantly in retrospect where it actually starts making more sense, because, we're too busy being young when we are young. And I think it took me quite a long time to gain the focus and attention needed to see exactly what was going on around me. And probably that process will continue until I leave this mortal coil,
Very true.
It's, everything I've studied has been about centering, and I'm a practitioner of Tai Chi now for nearly 20 years. And, it's all about the journey to get to know oneself. And the more we see of ourselves, the more we can realize who we are and what really goes on in life. So it's very hard to say any more than that about my youth.
Sure.
But it's been a constant process of knowing highly unusual people for most of my life.
Now, you mentioned Tai Chi and you live in Thailand, so let me tell you the story of my brother-in-law. So
Go ahead.
my sister married a Frenchman that she met in Hong
Yeah.
Kong. And at the wedding, and he's lived in China for 20 years.
Wow.
And at the wedding, I asked him, has it always, and they still live there now, has it always been China? Like, do you have the first memory of hearing about this place? And he said, yes, absolutely. In school, primary school in France, when you're doing geography and so on, he learned about this magical place, and it was like fireworks went off in his head, and
Mm,
he went there, and he lived there, and he's raising a family there, and he knew from a very early age that this was a place that he wanted to live. And I'm just
yeah.
wondering if you have a similar story now that you've been there for quite so long. Has there always been a kind of lure east for you?
Well, I never knew there was until I came and I visited friends in '91, which is pretty early for this part of the world. And I just felt at home, and I felt kind of wanted, and I felt the kindness of this place. And the longer I've stayed here, because I kept coming and going. It was about '95 I decided to work out a way of how to live here permanently. And I just feel so lucky because the culture is constantly opening for me, especially since releasing this book. I mean, the depth of this is gobsmacking. It it's incredible, Gordon. I mean, we've got seven. I've got 7 books in my head.
Nice. Well, seven's an auspicious number in many systems.
Not to write at the same time. It's
Yeah.
not. But and it will probably continue from there. The first book in this series, the Thai Occult, it's literally scratching the surface.
You feel that reading it. I mean, we were talking before I hit the record button, and I can smell the depth in it. This is why I'm very much looking forward to really deep diving into it, because it's one of those. It's a remarkable document of what I would like to see contemporary magic do, because it's filled with photos, which you've told me the majority of which you took, that
Yeah.
gives the absolute context of it, and it has interviews with people who are in there in the amulet markets and making these different animist fetishes, and you can just smell the depth in it. And I got to the end of it and I said, I wonder if once I hit the stop button, I'm going to tell Jenks I'm going to come visit him, because
Well, you're welcome. I
yeah.
mean, people are extremely welcome. Access to this has been very, very slow. It's been like, it's very like getting to know Thai people well. They are shy pussycats, and you can't move too quickly. You have to take things very slowly, and you have to let things develop in its own natural way. And now, I've got the opportunities to go and see some extremely remarkable people who are wanting now to tell their full stories. Nobody has ever asked them anything. Normally, at the moment, everything is from the Chinese market and the Asian market and the Singapores, and it's just look, money, money, money. Yeah, and now some mad Westerner is turning up, and with my friend Ajahn Mehta, who are doing the next book together, and we're asking them about it. We want their opinions, and the reaction to that has been quite astonishing. It's not been to close the door; it's been to open. It's like, oh, thank God, somebody wants to talk to me.
That's interesting. Is that so? Is it an inquirer led process, this opening up, or has there been something on their side? Because this has sort of happened in other traditions around the world, that it's time for the world stage for some of these spirits. We were talking about
It is.
Santa Muerte just before we hit the button, for instance. And is it coming from that side as well, that it seems like, okay, it's time for the world stage?
It is. It's like it's like anything. It's like with the Tai Chi studies I was doing. If you throw a pebble in the water, in where Chen village is, the ripples move out from there. Yes, they get smaller because information gets lost, but that's where the ripples come from. Yeah. And it's the same with the Thai system. It's gone through Malaysia, Singapore, and it's astonishingly popular. It's into China, Hong Kong, Taiwan. Huge markets. Chinese people popping to see Ajahn Challone with suitcases full of stuff.
So, what
And
is
then
it about Thailand specifically? I mean, let's talk about its sort of magico-religious landscape. Why is Thailand the magical place for neighboring countries?
well, that's my friend Peter Christopherson, who was in Thorpe Bristol. He lived here for a while, and he always said he chose this place, besides the incredibly attractive people, he chose this place because the boundary between the magical and the real worlds is extremely thin. And whatever has entered into this land, Theravada Buddhism from India and Sri Lanka, or Mahayana Buddhism from South China, or Brahmanism through the Rishi and the Lursi, whatever comes into this region gets added to. Yeah, there's something in this, and I don't just mean Thailand. It goes into Burma. In Laos, it's been lost because of the communist history and the war. It's in northern Thailand, South China. Yeah, there's just something in this area that whatever comes in, it becomes magical, and it's overridden by the ancient forms of magic.
Which is it's a kind of, if you were to look for a template animist model of spirits and ancestors and hauntings and haunted places and interactions between different classes of spirits and the dead on a daily basis. That is Thailand, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, the dead are only really important as batteries, to be honest with you. The ancestor worship tends to be more Chinese. The dead are kind of used here because it is mostly a necromantic art. There's three types of magic here. There's Kutasat, which is pure Buddhist magic. Yeah. In pure Buddhist magic, it just comes purely from Buddhist intention. Okay. Then you have the Sayasat, which is the occult, which is of every shade of grey. And really, the Sayasat can be defined as to whether the practitioner is seeking refuge within the Buddha. Because every kata, most katas, sorry, not every kata, most katas seek refuge in the Buddha because they're kind of saying, oh, I'm sorry about this, Buddha, but I need some money because I'm broke and I can't afford to feed the family. It's got that element in it.
And for listeners, a kata is essentially a spell.
Well, it's a mantra. It's a collection of words spoken with intention. So you have to know what it means. And it can be seen as a spell. Yeah. And then the last section really is black magic. And the black magic here is astonishingly black. It's pure animism. There's no love. There's no guise of anything good in it whatsoever. This is just very, very, very dark with all the Buddhism taken out.
And I mean, let's go back to, I guess, your first impressions of Thailand. As you said, you felt at home there, but was the initial impression that of magic?
It was of a spiritual land, really. And then, you see the Buddhist stuff everywhere. You see every house has a spirit house. Now, that isn't actually Buddhism. That's the land spirits to keep them placated. Yeah. And then you start seeing, oh, there's a tree there with dresses on. And slowly you start looking around, and literally every single aspect, most aspects of life here have got a magical basis to them, whether the Thais have remembered the original basis for it or not. Yeah. And like most modernizing countries, at the moment they're tending to push away some of the weirder ancient history. Like in the book, there's a section on Kuman, who is like the archetypal warrior mad romantic Casanova type figure. And some of the versions of that story are astonishingly dark, like ripping his own son out of his concubine to make his first Kuman Tong, things like that. Well, all those old versions are now being sanitized down, and that kind of happens. But no matter what the sanitization, no matter what actually changes here, you look around and I see magic with everything. I see people wanting magic and using it in many, many different ways.
And how successful is that attempted secularization or respectability going, because it's my understanding that it's not only things like the spirit houses attached to every dwelling. Magic runs through the operation of business in Thailand, and there really
Yep.
isn't anyone who isn't. If they're not a practitioner, they are a client of a practitioner. Is where it's at. Would that be? I mean, is that still the case?
That is the Western perspective of it. The Thai perspective of it, and this is really, you have to get used to this, is that, well, yes, it's all about the Buddha, and yes, you shouldn't do these things. But when offered any sort of magical advantage, everyone goes for it instantly. But
Smart people.
Then they'll deny it. Yeah? But then, yeah. So, like, okay, all the politicians here use magic, all of them. I mean, a lot of them use very dark magic to get their way, and in times of trouble, it can get a bit rough. Yeah. But ask them, like, they won't say they're using Thai magic. They always say, oh, it's Khmer magic. It's much stronger and much darker. And it's kind of wanting to save face and not be part of it, but still use it, because there is no such thing as Khmer magic anymore. They're all dead. But anything really strong, they say, oh, it's Khmer magic, to avoid the responsibility almost. Yeah.
And is there a class element to it?
Yes, there is. There's a class element to everything everybody does.
Yeah, so people, because obviously, I don't know if you're familiar with Jake Stratton Kent, but there's the throwaway, not really a throwaway. There's a comment in Scott's Discovery of Witchcraft, which is in reference to the other magicians, which Jake has built his kind of theory about a different strand of magic in the West on, and when Scott uses that the other magicians, it's a class-based statement, which is, we do this stuff. Well, Scott wasn't, he was, but the description was, there are respectable magicians and then there are the other ones, and that's a class-based statement, right? So we're not disreputable because we have astrology and natural sciences. Those ones over there are the dodgy poor folk doing dodgy things.
Yeah, I mean, and also here you have, there are still many, many, many highly talented ajahns who are the lay practitioners of this, and many highly talented monks, and they all tend to just discount each other.
Yep.
Oh, he's a bit rubbish, that one. You know what I mean? Or, it's just culture. It's just the Thai way.
Well, that looks like which is kind of where we're going to go next. That looks like a classic example of a magical economy. You have a similar thing in witches' markets in Bolivia, where it's people. There are economic components, and the culture of it is one of a bit of give and take, and even mild cursing, because that's just kind of how if you want to be in this business, that's what happens.
Right. Yeah. Which you don't get over here, by the way, which a lot of people find very strange.
What, they don't curse each other to steal business?
No.
Well, that must be Buddha's benign influence.
Exactly. It's because really you answer everything with metta, with loving kindness. Yeah. And in practice, to be honest with you, having seen many Thai people in, the difficulties of life that we go through, or in difficult situations, watching them make the choices they make as to what to say is one of the greatest educations I've ever witnessed.
Impressive.
It's so smart, the way they deal with stuff like that, or deal with the difficulties of life. And like the Ajahn I see a lot, Ajahn Chalerm, he was a monk for 20 years. So watching him choose his reactions to include metta, which, as again, I will repeat again, is loving kindness, that works as a magical thing better than anything ever could. It is just utterly disarming. So they've just chosen a slightly different way of disarming other people.
Yeah, that's definitely Thai specific. I find that fascinating. You mentioned this Ajahn was a monk for a while, 20 years. We could just call it a while, shall we?
Yeah.
Thailand is is a disparate place. I mean, from outside, it looks like Thailand. But are there variations across the country in how the Thai occult is both experienced and practiced?
very much so. Well, you have to consider actually in various parts of the country, we only have modern representations of the country state. It's only a line on a map. Yeah. So in the north, we have the Lana tradition, which really came from the Taigadai tribes who came down from Yunnan and traveled throughout that area. And it has its own language, its own techniques, yeah, its own way. Yeah, the Satyang tattooing up there has its own style. And then on the west, you have the Burmese tradition, the Mon traditions, which are seemingly older. We're not at the bottom of that one yet. They're using a different language, but they seem to have kept a lot of knowledge. And now suddenly, in the amulet markets, there's a couple of old Burmese makers turned up who look very interesting. I'm just trying to get hold of some of that kit now just to check it out. And then on the east side, you have Isan, which is the eastern plateau. It looks like the pregnant stomach on the side going into Cambodia and southern Laos. And that tends to be more Khmer influence, and they use the Com script. And some of that gets pretty dark, to be honest with you. But Isan has been kind of, they're holding the knowledge for the Khmer. And in time, it will go back into Cambodia because unfortunately Pol Pot killed everybody. And in central Thailand, it's predominantly Buddhist magic. But that, again, can have many, many different shades. Most of it does not include human materials, prime materials. But you've got some very famous old monks who specialized in human materials. But because they were such high, spiritually high people, they all ended up being arahants. They could do, and it's still seen as Buddhist magic. So you have every shade. You've got three languages. There's two other languages as well, which really are so difficult to find now. We didn't include it in our interviews. Yeah, it's a melting pot. That's the only way to describe it.
Well, that was going to be the next question. When it comes to melting pots, does it properly melt in major cities? Is there somewhere in the medium-term horizon a kind of like emergent, call it like an international Thai occult happening in major cities that draws on these different influences?
It's starting to happen. The procedure tends to be, at the moment, it looks like the procedure is recognized locally as being somebody who is adept at helping people with their lives. Yeah. Then recognized in the closest city, then picked up by amulet dealers. And then in time, the very successful ones move into the city, so it's easier for them to be accessed. The smartest one has been the Jan Chalern, but he's got a very smart lady looking after him because he doesn't touch money. Yeah, somebody else has to do it from his monk background. And she moved pretty close to the international airport. So people fly in for the day, go and see him, stock up, various shops stock up, and then fly out.
See, Qantas used to transit through Bangkok. See, if I'd known that.
Yeah, it's some of them are getting quite clever, and Ajahns, and like many of the Ajahns, have actually stated to me, "Oh, we're going international." In other words, outside Asia. Now it's going to take time. People are going to need escorting for a while. I'm trying to sort that out in Chiang Mai, and I do it in Bangkok. And as affordably as we can do it. But in time, if people want to go and see people, if they get in contact, I can put them in the right direction and they will be escorted so also they can ask questions and, be able to go and see in the Jan that they would not be able to go and see on their own.
So we keep hearing amulet dealers and so on. So describe amulet markets to us, Jenks, and maybe even your either first experience with them or something about it that people listening to the show won't know. Talk us through that kind of amulet economy.
Well, there's a few amulet markets in Bangkok. The most famous one is near the Grand Palace. Yeah. Now, there's only one shop there that actually sells the real thing, and only half of the shop. The rest of it is either nice copies, and some of them, this stuff is funky, yeah. I mean, but you're not going to get any spiritually active materials in there unless you know what you're looking for. The Ajahns do go there, the makers do go there and pick up things that they can instill with an essence of whatever they want to instill it with. But really, predominantly, they are empty. The only way to generally get something good, something that we consider as real, is to get it direct from the Ajahns.
And describe a few sort of typical amulets, because there are some amazing photos in the book of the different ingredients that go into different ones. And when you say some of it gets quite dark, we're not fucking around here when we say that, are we?
No, I don't like to fuck around anyway, Gordon. No, I mean oh God, I mean, this is the alchemy. This is a book. This is going to be a book at some point. Is the alchemy of Thai Occult. The herbal lore is enormous. The use of woods is enormous, and now with the use of woods, it generally relies on the legends associated with the woods and whether there is an inherent spirit within the wood. My favourite are Takian wood and Mangudam. Takian wood has got Mare Takian, Mother Takian in the wood itself. It is a haunted tree, but not with a ghost, with a spirit. The tree itself has a spirit, and it brings an extra element to anything that it constitutes. So you can make a prangang out of Takian wood, and it gives it a real kick up the arse. Yeah. Ngudam is the tree that in Thai legend that you climb to get out of hell. And of course, it's totally unclimbable. It's just covered in huge, great spikes. And there's demons at the bottom with spears to help you on the way, so you rip yourself to pieces.
Also a great image in the book.
It's great. You see in some temples you see representations of the Ngudam tree with people trying to climb it being ripped to pieces. So everything in it is going to have some sort of cultural reference. Besides that, you have the Phra elements. Now, the Phra elements can constitute bone powder, chunks of bone, blood made into something called Naman Phra, which is a corpse oil extracted from a corpse, which the section on that in the book is particularly good. I'm really quite proud of that section. Naman Phra, we're going to do a proper interview on Naman Phra at some point, because it's a procedure carried out on a body maybe a couple of days old, whereby they only extract maybe 9 drops of oil through certain kata and certain vichar, which is the knowledge of how to do it. That can then be melted, that can then be added to make something astonishingly powerful. Oh God, there's so many of the hair is one of my favourite Phra materials. Phra is any human material. Corpse hair, which has a very creepy element to it. Teeth in amulets, at the back of amulets, generally represent the ferocity of the amulet, and it can chew through any magical problem that you want the spirit in the amulet to work on. Skin is a particular favourite for something called an inku, which is the loving couple, which is a little bit like a Thai yin-yang, except that it's like 2 people intertwined, and it's used for binding people in love. Oh God, what else? Actual flesh is used in some amulets. I'm trying to think of all my body parts.
I was more wanting to go into the kind of the really there's some grisly stuff about fetuses and miscarriages and how they're conceptualized, because I get the thinking, but if you want to talk us through that, because I thought that was really, really interesting stuff.
Okay, there are 2 forms of fetal amulets. One is called a Lutgork, and a Lutgork is legendary here for having the capability to kill. That's the only way of putting it. then they are a child that has never tasted life, but it's a certain witcher. It's a certain way of creating the Lutgrok, whereby the power comes from its lost life. So one of the things about the Thai Occult is that they do the work for you that you would normally have to do in Western necromancy. So the Ajahn or the Maker prepares something for you to use. But Lutgroks are not, they're not for a beginner under any circumstances. These are really extremely powerful items. I'm not allowed them in the house. And, I don't necessarily want one in the house anyway. And the other one is a Kuman Tong, which is the most famous. Now, the Kuman Tong allegedly stems from Kunpei made the first Kuman Tong by ripping out his unborn male son from the stomach of his concubine and taking it into a temple ground and performing the witcher necessary to bind the spirit to him. Now, originally it was as a familiar. So this is an unborn male child familiar that had the wherewithal to travel, to go and influence people, and there's 4 types of Kuman Tong that are reputedly can kill, although fortunately I've never met any of them. And basically, I think the Kuman Tong is actually older than Buddhism, but there's no evidence of it. It has been overridden by Buddhism now, and most Kuman Tong are benign in nature, except for the bringing of luck and wishes. Yeah,
and what way, sorry, carry on.
The way they construct them is fascinating. This is going to be another. This is a big piece we're going to do this year, because there is a system within the Thai Buddhist practices whereby they meditate on the decomposition of the body. And there were 31 decompositions, now there's 32. I will get a full list of them shortly. And we have 3 interviews coming up on this practice. And there are certain temples you can go to, or people in the monkhood can go to for this practice. And they even do a stay away home version of sending you photographs of various levels of decomposure. And it basically, the meditation system basically passes the monk from life by understanding the decomposition of his own body. Yeah, so it's one of those transition systems within Theravada Buddhism. Now, because he's gone through that, he is able, or the Ajahn is able, to constitute the body of a spirit within himself and use a child spirit to be able to put it into an object. Yeah. Now, this is going to take a lot more work, but the concept of it is astonishing, is fascinating, and it's about building a spirit body yourself and having a ghost inhabit it. Now, people have asked, why would a child spirit inhabit an object for you? Well, the Thais can be very persuasive, number one. But really, it's to take them, there's got to be a meta aspect to this. And it's taking the child out of one of the levels of hell, which can be a pretty scary place, and giving it the chance to pay back some of its karma. Because the karma of losing life, or being, usually it's from abortions, the karma of losing life before you've even lived is particularly bad. So the interplay here is that the child ghost would benefit from not being in the wildness of the spirit world, and at the same time has the chance of raising himself with hopefully the eventual aim of passing on to the next life. It's a very complex story that we're slowly getting to the bottom of.
So this, I find this really interesting. So for people who are kind of listening, what you're essentially doing is adopting a spirit child into your family, and the reason,
and you should not have one unless you are willing to adopt a spirit child with the responsibilities that go with that. Yeah.
And I find that very interesting. There are odd parallels, which we'll get to towards the end, but in
Mm.
some of the kind of theurgical traditions, well, even just more grimoire traditions in general, where you are either using or calling up spirits of dead criminals or so on, emerges from this classical idea that a human interacting with higher spirits
Mm.
elevates his or her, you know, becomes closer to God by doing so. And the same thing happens in reverse with a human interacting with lower spirits. You're kind of accumulating, well, Jesus merit, if you will, by lifting these spirits up, and the kind of promise you make to dead criminals if they're being involved in grimoire magic work is that you will pray for them or pay for a mass to be said so they can leave purgatory and so on, and you have that same kind of structure of
That's fascinating.
interacting with the departed. I'm putting this in the context because it's amazing stuff in the book, and it's tremendous detail, and I look forward to getting feedback from listeners once they've read it. But there's a really interesting idea of interacting for mutual benefit across the spirit divide that I think is in this, and I think is incredible.
Well, the thing that's important here to mention, really, and that's a fascinating analogy because I mean, this book was about also trying to place the Thai occult within a world system, which is why there's a very general comparison to necromancy, etc., etc. But the thing here that the Thais would note is the responsibility, the responsibility to yourself to know what you are doing and the responsibility towards what you are doing instead of just blindly looking for an advantage or magic. Yeah, this is something that Buddhism in general wants to help people to raise themselves. Yeah. And then that aspect of it is often really overlooked, where people are looking for short-term fix and everything else. But this has to be a spiritual journey where you have to kind of understand what you are doing, and from that understanding, we grow.
Yeah, so the mutually beneficial component needs to be in there, and I
Mm.
find that interesting because I mean we'll talk about what Kuman Tong do. I mean it's not a familiar. You are essentially adopting a dead child into your family. Now a spirit has,
Originally,
yeah,
the first one was a familiar,
true.
but not many of us could deal with that.
No, and what that means is that you have a family relationship with it, but it does so happen what that so essentially, you have someone new into your family who happens to have special powers, but they're still a family member. So
Yep.
it's not a transactional relationship in the sense of, oh, I'd like to get a promotion, or I'm competing with someone for my job. I'm gonna go get a Kuman Tong and tell it to get me a promotion. It's that's not the relationship, is it?
It's not really. I mean, it's got to be a give and take relationship. I mean, one of the things about when you receive a Kuman Tong is that you have to introduce it to the house. You've got to introduce it to the spirits of the land and anything else that you're worshipping. Yeah. You've got to feed him. Well, I mean, but that's convenient. Yeah. So that might be only once every 3 days or once a week, whatever else, and get to know him. And eventually, when you've done enough work with the kata, in reciting the kata, and still, which acts to still the mind, you will be able to listen to him. And then it can get very interesting because you can send him to do work for you, and you pay back. You make promises for that work. Oh, I'll buy you a car, a little toy or something. It's just, it's like bribing children, but you have to have the responsibility that you are going to take care of it, or they can go a little wild, and there's ways to deal with them if they do go a little wild. The odd tap on the head if he's getting a bit naughty, playing around at night and keeping you awake, or just the end of a chopstick, just tap him on the head a little bit and go, oh, come on, behave, and as you would with a child. But they have to fit within the family realm and within your household, and they can be extremely beneficial things to have as long as you put the work in, as long as you do take care of it.
And I found the idea of what they are has evolved, as you said, from a familiar to sort of installed goldish statuettes to something far more modern today. If you want to kind of talk through the evolution of the Kuman Tong as a kind of object in Thai culture.
But it's different fads bring in different things, and these things tend to recycle. I've been in it long enough now to see the recycling of some of the older styles of amulets. I think Huatanu is going to come back shortly, which is a bull. That's a very ancient form. Rahu is coming back. It's a very ancient form. And Kuman Tong had a huge rise in popularity over the last, maybe starting 3 or 4 years ago, and it's just starting to taper off again. When Ajahn Tep, and Tep means angel, by the way, Ajahn Tep invented and started making Kuman Tongs in an actual doll. Pardon me. So the price of which actually depended more on the quality of doll that you want. So the top American dolls, which look astonishingly lifelike, are related to the cost of the actual doll. His work and most of Jan's work for a pretty standard set fee per thing or whatever they do. So basically we had a huge rise in people and in the acceptance of having a child spirit in your life, because it could just be a doll sat on the sofa, except you took care of it like a Kuman Tong. Now, there are 2 types of these dolls, and I was seeing people walking around Bangkok with them, on the SkyTrain with them. Normally, that end of the SkyTrain would become sparse of people and they'd all move away because many people are scared of these things. And there's basically 2 types of them. You have your prior Kuman Tong, which is the Kuman Tong that contains prime materials, human materials, which acts like the battery and helps the ghost reside. And you have the tape Kuman Tongs. Now, the tape is where a highly qualified Ajahn can put in a child's angel without necessarily having the prime materials. Many people started to prefer this, but the higher you go in the spiritual realm, the less likely you are to have any personal advantages come from the item, because they're already high up. They can't be bothered, as one Ajahn once said to me. So, and also people started faking them, because all you need to do is write yantra on the outside of the doll, which is then covered by expensive clothes. So it's kind of, and the government at one point actually stepped in. These were becoming so popular to remind people it's not really a Buddhist concept to carry around a ghost in a doll. So it's kind of waned off again, but periodically we do get those explosions of popularity. And it's quite fab to see. You go into the big shopping centre and you'll see somebody carrying around a ghost, which really tickles me.
Oh no, it's wonderful. I found I find that fascinating, and it's one of those. So when you're talking about situating the Thai occult within a kind of global context, this is sort of the question of the hour for magic as a universal term around the world, which is how we look at differences and similarities in a more mature way than we did in the kind of high imperial anthropological world, where you just kind of wander around and look at non-white practices and match what they were doing to something that was white and go, ta-da! It's not actually the case at all. But and
the British were the best of that, of course.
Yeah, they were pretty good. The Germans were all right at their kind of when it came to northern India, but the British like things in little boxes, and so that worked very well.
Yeah.
What's sort of happening now, and a big part of it is having the voices from within culture speak and share and look at which bits match or have similarities without making a kind of power statement about, oh well, then these are all kind of these are really different, quote unquote, really different versions of the one thing which looks like our thing, and that universal model is being thrown out, and these discussions are happening. And one of the ways these discussions can happen is in this sort of inspiriting of an object or a fetish or a doll, because I found the Kuman Tong thing very interesting by holding it up to, say, traditions that emerged in West Africa, or holding it up to, well, actually staying with Africa, holding it up to traditions that became Hermeticism in Egypt, with this idea of using certain powers that are associated with the priesthood or someone elevated to make homes for spirits in objects, to essentially bring them alive. And I find that really interesting. I think that says something potentially profound that has to be left unsaid unless we start universalizing again about what these practices mean and what they sort of say about reality in general.
Well, we have no idea. We can find no connection between the magic in this part of the world and I'm in Southeast Asia at the moment, just to remind people, and the African traditional religions. But there are some very, very close strains between the two. And I've been lucky enough to get to know a Haitian voodoo priest who did some work for the book in testing Ngan Phra. And he's found the one thing about the Thai Occult is that he can kind of relate some of the deities. He's more fond of deities than ghosts. He can relate the deities to things within his own practices. And he can actually understand some of how they made it from his standpoint. But the big differences have come with the use of the katar, use of the reciting spells, which has wonderful effects on the mind in clearing mental patterns, and the use of the way they instill the item, because he's just got a couple of very expensive things from me. And he is astonished as to how there is nothing of the maker within them. Like, there's nothing that he got something for a nine-tailed fox. It was a full penang, a full front of skull. And he is astonished at the purity of it, because when he makes something, there is something of him within it. Whereas in the Thai system, there is often nothing of the maker themselves within it. There is just the purity of what they're trying to put in. And he's been quite astonished as to the Thai system itself, and he can't understand why more people don't know about it.
Well, hopefully they will. There are other sort of repeating patterns that look similar. I've sort of done some work in, Starships is largely about trying to work out what the cosmology was in, say, Eurasia 20,000 years ago. There are other components to it where you see the astrological bits. It honestly looked like Northwest European folk magic at some point. So that or hoodoo. So dirt from 7 graveyards, dirt from you look at it and go. So it's that same process is in the construction of similar folk magic charms, where you have the 7.
I think they found it all through zeitgeist or just on their own merit. I don't think necessarily this has actually been spread by word of mouth.
No, it's as I said, it's been a very interesting book to read for the purposes of that kind of voice sharing that I sort of mentioned before. It's really interesting to hold up what another autonomous, independent system has and what it's willing to share, and lining that up against other things. So there's a temptation, particularly with occultism, because it's also like magic is fascinating, right? There's no other way to describe it.
Magic is magic, and actually, I think people just discover what works, and then they discover that that works for them as well.
No, exactly, and
the Thai Ajahn Chalem has been fascinated as to the reaction within the West from other Ajahns of other systems. Ajahn is just the teacher, it means a teacher. And he's quite fascinated with the fact that a voodoo Ajahn is enjoying his work. He's like, oh, and it's like, oh, wow, oh, they do similar things. And then we have a conversation about it, the voodoo priest has got bone implants under his skin. And that's something that happens here as well. Something that happens here that he's not aware of, that he wasn't aware of until he's going to get one when he comes to visit, is the fact that for Satyan, which is the traditional magical tattoo system, they actually also use Phra oils. So you have a ghost put into your flesh, and there are. We've not found the end of the different types of oil yet. We're still investigating it. So, there are great similarities. And then suddenly you realize, oh God, there's a whole world of it here that we don't know about.
And this is probably the implications for reality, I think, are quite important when as you were kind of saying, it's interesting to see practitioners from different systems around the world have something that looks broadly similar from a praxis perspective, if not a cosmology, and to do with this inspiriting of things. And that, I think, as you say, if people have kind of worked it out, if we've optimized this extra-dimensional diplomacy, it works better this way, that says something quite significant about the universe, because it's sort of further evidence that it is quite enchanted.
And actually, what I think will happen next in this region of the world is that once we try and write down the alchemy of this part of the world, people will try and use some of those elements and some of those properties, some of those plants, those woods, and have a bash at it in their own system. And this is my feeling as to where it's all going to go. Eventually, people are going to be like going into a magical sweet shop. Oh, I'll just have a little bit of Thai licorice to put in that there, and a little bit of flesh and go on that side there, and eventually it will all become human magic.
We were talking about the reenchantment of the world, the sort of mission that I put in Pieces of 8 before we hit the button, and that's you're basically describing my utopia in that sense.
Well, basically watch this space. I've now started writing with an Ajahn. He's a Satyana Ajahn, so he makes the magical tattoos here. And his level of Thai is better than mine, and he knows a whole different field of stuff than I know. So we're going to be doing the next few together, which will speed up the process and improve and provide the next level, which is basically getting the Ajahns to answer the questions, getting the Ajahns to open. And seemingly at the moment, they are very, very, very willing to do so.
All right. So when we talk about things going global, one of the other, so the Kuman Tong thing I found fascinating. There is a being described in this book, Pranyang. I think I got that right.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Who
you kind of observed. You said you're surprised, particularly when it comes to occultists, that this guy isn't we aren't more aware of him, and you get the feeling, and I think you're correct, having read it, that he's gearing up to have his moment on the world stage. So, Jenks, please introduce people.
Well, strangely, I've just got my favourite Pranyang back. It's hanging around my neck at the moment. From Ajahn to learn. Pranyang is a very strange one. We're going to be doing more work on this, but he's regarded as the deity that's the closest to the human heart. So he's the deity that we can actually access. It's one that we can understand, and he will understand us. It's pre-Buddhist. We consider, and the Ajahns consider it to be as well. And he's kind of the original male element. He's the consort of Me Per, who is the original female element, who's always seen with her legs open, showing her vulva, who's got the magic of procreation and fertility and the blood of childbirth. Pranyang is more. He's more the naughty boy. He's the consort. But we kind of choose how to behave with Penang. He allows us that leeway, and he takes the role almost of like a spiritual bank manager. He will help, he will loan you future luck, he will loan you future help, but you have to pay it back. So again, there is the kind of the responsibility that we have to find for ourselves involved in that. And there are many, many thousands of Penang. Penang is actually considered to be a real demon. And there are thousands of level of Penang, all the way from the depths of hell, all the way up to Buddhahood. Depending on who you get it from and the capabilities of the person who makes it, they can make quite high Penang, like angel Penang, and they feel like it. And then from other people, it's quite obvious that it has a different personality and different feeling. And slowly but surely, we learn how to work with the Penang. Now, really, in essence, I think it's like learning how to work with ourselves. I think it's learning about what we do as the male of the species. And females can follow Penang as well. I don't mean it that way, but predominantly attracts males. And he tries to make us aware of all the things that we do in life. He's easy to take care of. He likes a drink and a cigarette, and eventually becomes your partner, and eventually will inhabit you. And it's a very beneficial relationship.
When you're talking about ones that can head into the like sort of more angelic direction. Some of the pictures in the book don't look like they're heading in that direction. This is the guy. This is the guy. If you like your sex, drugs, and rock and roll, he is your homeboy.
Yeah, that's the one. But you see, from that you grow. That is only a period of life. Yeah. Now, what tends to happen is that, like in everything, if you're into sex, drugs, and rock and roll, eventually there's some sort of breaking point reached, because it throws everything out of balance. It's chaos and everything else. And everything related to anything to do with Thai Buddhism eventually leads you back to the centering of the self. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll cannot be considered as the centering of the self. So in time, we learn about who we are, and this is an aid to learning about who you are. He will aid you if you decide to be very sex, drugs, and rock and roll with loads of partners. He'll give you loads of help. Yeah, he likes to be left in a pair of ladies' knickers at night, things like that, which increases the love magic. Try not to get any blood on him, though. He goes completely wild with blood, especially from the female period, menstrual blood. Sorry. There's rules with the guy, but he will actually help you be what you want to be at that time, until from life you learn other things. So this is why he's going to be popular.
Well, he's got a remarkable ad campaign. It's like, wait a minute, there's a sex, drugs, and rock and roll demon. I'm in. Man. And then the trick is, it's like a movie for children. You have to learn something in the end.
It's exactly the same, and it is that simple. Yeah. Hopefully, we learn things before we go completely off the rails. But there are, as you'll see in the book, there are Penang in the act of sex, Penang being rather naughty in all sorts of different positions. And then with the higher Penang, leading up to something called Prachai, which is the only one step below the Buddha, he just becomes more like a seated Buddha with a pointy hat. But in the lower realms, in the demon realms, in the realms of upper and lower parts of hell, he often has red eyes. He can see into the future. He knows what's coming for you. And I think as an aid to getting to know yourself, he's second to none. I have a few gangsters, as I call them.
Yeah, I like that.
We have gangsters in this world. These are all terms that we invented. I've got a couple of friends who are really into Ngan and often wear it themselves, which I recommend rather than giving it to anybody else. I think that's a bit dark. We call them necronauts because it's quite trippy. And there's going to be some sort of cultural appropriation of this sort of stuff when it hits the Western world, and we'll have some fun with it.
Yeah, I think that's when you kind of, to return to the cosmic supermarket idea, one of the reasons we have to have the discussions about sameness and difference across cultures when it comes to magic is because magic is inherently appropriative from the very beginning. It is things that work, and the kind of foundation, well, not really foundational text, but the earliest text that indicates a continuity in the Western tradition is the Greek magical papyri, which is a collection of spells from all across the Mediterranean by this one Theban guy. There's Egyptian gods, Greek gods, Near Eastern gods. It's all good if it works, and we need to have a way of thinking and behaving in such a way so that it is agglomerative rather than appropriative, maybe, and that's a
very beautiful way of putting it, Gordon.
That's the challenge, but it's the essential challenge. And I've had a bunch of guests on talking about how we navigate that. And step one is to, I guess, say that historically appropriation hasn't been great, but nevertheless, appropriation or agglomeration is a function of magic. So we need to do this in a way that works, because there's some really fascinating stuff, and also to do otherwise. And this is the kind of conversation when we talk about things like Santa Muerte in particular. To do otherwise is to deny these spirits agency. Like it's up to her if she wants time on the world stage. To say to non Latin people should approach it with an awareness that it's outside your culture and do that sensitively. But by the same token, Santa Muerte is on a tear. She's just going to do what she's going to do, and I get the feeling with some of the stuff happening in your corner of the world that needs to be tabled when we talk about what is appropriative and what isn't.
Well, I just think, I think the greatest journey in life is a journey towards self-responsibility and knowledge, and this is all just part of that. I actually don't ask for anything from these things. I just want them in my life. Yeah, which people find really odd, but I find life much richer by having these things around me.
I would agree with that. It's a phrase I use a fair bit, but once you know this stuff is real, there's no getting the toothpaste back in the tube. Like, who wants to last after a speedboat or something when you can do this kind of stuff and live in an enchanted world? And I really resonate with that. I do like shit though, so I sometimes ask them for stuff.
I like shit as well, but it tends to end up being like some amulet that I just treat myself to something, which is quite a lot of money, because I absolutely adored it, and that's kind of my speedboat appropriation style.
I love it.
I'll just buy something that I regard as quite astonishing and feel extremely lucky to be able to have it in my life for a while. And much in the same way that I'm lucky to be able to go and visit some of the things I've seen recently. Some of the people I met who helped with the book, how on earth could I actually want more in my life than having the chance to meet people who have gone on particular journeys and become remarkable in the process? And that seemingly is going to continue all the way through this year and next. We are now I can now perceive this as almost a duty towards the Thai Jans and the magical community here to tell this story properly. And it feels like that, and we are being put into that position. And I accept that position readily. I will do a good job, and I will allow these people a voice that they so far don't have. And hopefully do a job that people can understand and appreciate a very deep culture from a beautiful part of the world.
Well, Jenks, if the rest, I agree. I think you have been I think you're on a mission from God, if you will,
Yeah.
to Blues Brothers it. Yeah. But honestly, if the rest of the journey or project is anything like the first book, I think you're on some good shit there. It's a remarkable achievement, and I
very,
found it
very
fascinating.
special. We have some very special things coming, and it looks like it's not going to stop coming for quite a while.
Excellent. Well, on that note, for people who want to stay in touch with these special things that are on the way, where might they go to find out more about you?
Well, there's the easiest place is a Facebook site called the Thai Occult Book. There's only me. I answer any inquiries. Try not to be too mad, as I always tell everybody who goes there. And you can always buy a book and read the basic knowledge. And if you're visiting, we can try and help you out if you want to meet anybody and everything else.
Wonderful, and this will be in the show notes as well as links to where people buy the books and the book and so on. Because again, fantastic work, Jenks. This has been.
There's only 100 left, by the way.
Ah, all right. Well, people, this will be for the people who listen straight away.
But at some point, there will be a volume 2, and it's going to be much more in depth than volume 1.
Wonderful. Well, Jenks, thanks once again for your time, and we're chatting December 31, so it's New Year's here. So happy New Year's. Have a happy and prosperous 2017.
And the same to you, Gordon. It's been an absolute pleasure.
How about that then? Adopting spirit children, amulet markets, party demons, magic tattoos, and wizard monks. Do you ever get the feeling everyone but you is having all the fun? I really did find this book fascinating, and yes, I said the word interesting way too many times, when I should have been saying thought-provoking. But the reality is, the book was both of those terms. 21st century ethnography is a challenging subject at the best of times, particularly when it comes to magic, as the magical world conceptualizes these forms and artifacts as real in a very different way to academia, or at least to academia publicly. And for me, it was the photos and the interviews that got the Thai Occult across that line in a sensitive and inspiring way. For those whose practice is very spirit-centric, and regardless of which part of the world that practice hails from, there's probably a lot to learn from Jenks's book. And if having much to learn is a 2017 resolution of yours, sidebar, what an amazing segue, then please do subscribe to the show in iTunes, on YouTube, or in your favorite podcatcher. Say hi and let me know what you think at runesoup.com or the RuneSoup Facebook page, or find me on Twitter where I am Gordon, Gordon _White, WHITE. Until next time.